Welcome to the target stream for MintPress News. I'm your host, Robert Inlakesh. As always, thank you to everyone for joining us. The U.S. Iran ceasefire is officially dead as both sides escalate towards an all-out regional war. Since our last show, Iran's IRGC launched a surprise attack that eliminated U.S. ATACMS missiles in Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia has bombed Yemen's Sana'a International Airport, triggering a retaliation. We'll look at this and more because it appears as if the war is about to expand to a level above what we saw even earlier this year. But before we begin, the target stream is a 100% viewer-funded show. In the last 2 years, we were financially targeted and banned by PayPal, and our fundraisers were taken down by Indiegogo and GoFundMe. They even withheld our funds. So we are looking for 300 new members to make sure we can keep this show alive. You can join MintPress on Patreon or right here on YouTube and join our membership program. So to get right into things, it does appear as if everything is heading towards an escalation, perhaps even larger than what we saw earlier this year. And the reasons why we will, of course, get into. We'll also look at the damage inflicted by Iran's preemptive strikes and then its retaliatory strikes as well against U.S. facilities and ground-to-ground missile systems in the Persian Gulf and beyond, of course, because they have struck virtually every single U.S. base in the region, and they have brought a lot of firepower to bear. The United States primarily is striking southern Iran, but it does appear as if that is also going to change, that it's going to escalate. There's a lot of propaganda being spread. And of course, the Yemen front is now fully open for the first time since early 2022. So there's a lot to look at there. And currently, the Trump administration is claiming that they are going to reimpose and CENTCOM, or as I like to call it, COPCOM, announced that they would be reimposing the blockade on Iran. So they're going to lock down the Strait of Hormuz in reaction to Iran also announcing that they would shut down the Strait of Hormuz. So a bit of an Uno reverse card. And it's not, of course, just that, because Trump is taking it a step further. He's saying that, like Iran proposed a toll and then a fee, an environmental fee it came up with, and this was supposed to be included, according to Iran's interpretation of the memorandum of understanding that is now dead officially. Iran has finally declared it dead after it being violated so many times that we cannot count. But Iran has officially declared it dead now. But the MOU was supposed to grant Iran control over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran interpreted that as it, along with Oman, being able to charge a fee or a toll. And so, of course, in Trumpian fashion, he's also said that we're going to charge a fee, but it's going to be 20% fee for cargo shipped through the Strait of Hormuz. He said, we're taking ownership, guardianship over the Strait of Hormuz. How he's going to become the guardian of the Strait of Hormuz, again, it's unclear, I guess, what he's even saying, because it's just blatantly ridiculous at this point. And it really does seem like Trump is massively bothered by the fact that Iran launched a preemptive attack, which took out its ATACMS in Kuwait. And according to reports that started surfacing initially, Iran managed to inflict, we heard, according to those reports, 12 casualties, and that these casualties, there was a rather lengthy, a detailed report that came out, or reports that started coming out, which started detailing how they were airlifted to Germany and all of the rest of this. And COPCOM came out afterwards. They didn't, of course, deny that the ATACMS were struck because, of course, we do have proof that the ATACMS were, in fact, struck. We have video footage from the scene that emerged, and you're seeing some of this here on screen. So evidently, they did get hit, but COPCOM came out and said that there were no casualties, all its forces were accounted for. And I am skeptical of that because Iran did launch those missiles. We heard that between 4 to 8 missiles could have been launched. Of course, we don't have direct confirmation of everything that happened. But I'm very skeptical of the US claim that no soldiers were even wounded, because in the past, we've seen that the US does lie about it. And some people have come forth and said the US doesn't lie about its casualties. Well, we have an example of the US lying about its casualties, because back in 2020, if you do remember, the US took out in a drone strike the head of the Quds force, the IRGC General Qasem Soleimani, and in response, Iran struck the Ain al-Assad base, the US portion of Ain al-Assad, located in Iraqi territory. Now, initially, Donald Trump came on television, he did a speech in which he said that everyone is fine, basically that there were no casualties, nothing. And before this, he was threatening over Twitter at the time, now it's Truth Social, he was threatening to hit like 50 plus cultural sites and all of the rest if any of his forces were harmed. And then we started getting these leaked reports slowly that, oh, yeah, 14 soldiers, 50 soldiers. Actually, it's over 100 soldiers with traumatic brain injuries. Now, they didn't admit deaths in the end, although people suspected, and there have been a number of reports and allegations and sources claiming that they know this and that. But they did admit that there was over 100 injuries, traumatic brain injuries. Keep in mind here as well, that was an attack in 2020 that Iran had informed Iraq about 30 minutes prior to it launching its strike, its missiles about. So the United States had about half an hour to prepare, probably a little bit under that, to prepare for that attack. And it was over 100 traumatic brain injuries. Initially, they denied it completely. And again, if these ATACMS were taken out in the way that they were, the idea that there were no casualties at all, not even traumatic brain injuries or anything of the sort, is questionable to say the very least. Instead, what COPCOM started doing was releasing its own footage of strikes against Iran, which we'll get into some of them. And here on screen, you're seeing the footage released. Now, I'm just going to pause this actually. If you see the structure that they're hitting, this is like a kamikaze boat that they're driving here into an Iranian port. But I want you to pay attention to the structure that is next to that port there, because it's already been destroyed. This is a site that the United States has struck multiple times before in Iran. So it's not a new target. What they're doing here is they're publishing this footage to try and brag. But there's two things to note. Number one, this site has already been destroyed. You can see the structures there are already destroyed. The second thing to note here is they're using the same tactics as Iran. They're actually copying Iran's military tactics, because Iran doesn't have a deep water navy. It has these speedboats, right? And it launches these kamikaze boats into its targets. And so the US is doing just that. It's sort of copying Iran and doing this symbolic attack. And I mean, I guess they're claiming this is a victory that they hit a pier here. But it's just very underwhelming. They struck across southern Iran, of course. So there's multiple sites that have been hit. And I don't doubt that the United States will bring a lot of firepower. We've seen that specifically they've been targeting areas like Bandar Abbas, which we'll get onto on the screen here. Qashem Island as well has been taking hits, but Bandar Abbas, Qashem Island, Kish has been struck as well. Up here as well, and they've actually struck Harg Island a number of times, and they've launched strikes against some of these lesser islands here down in the Persian Gulf, which we've looked at, like Abu Musa and the lesser and greater Tumb here that they've been striking. So the United States has been striking across southern Iran. There have been accusations of the air defenses being triggered in other areas, in Isfahan, Ahvaz, and even Tehran, none of that has actually been confirmed yet. There have been strikes a little bit deeper, however, into Iranian territory, but it has been situated primarily in the south. And Iran has declared that the Strait of Hormuz here is completely closed. They will strike any ship that attempts to violate the blockade. And they've struck 2 ships since the morning that have attempted to transit the Strait of Hormuz. So we've seen a significant escalation. Another thing to note, as we're on the topic of just looking at the United States, its military tactics, what it's doing, what it's striking in Iran, is that they have employed what's known as a Lucas drone. There's some debris here. This Lucas drone is a copy of the Shahid drone model that the Iranians use. And the United States have, again, copied Iran and are using their own tactics against them, which, you might say, well, that's very intelligent of the United States in doing. But of course, they spend way more than the Iranians spend on their drones and to develop everything, because that's the way the military industrial complex works. They just spend ridiculous amounts of money on projects like this, where Iran, it costs them peanuts and it's very cost effective. But 2 of these Lucas drones have been shot down since the round has begun of strikes over the past days. And really, it's been over the past week. Now, this is a map of all the different locations over the past days that have been struck by Iran's IRGC and Navy and Army. Sorry, because the Army and the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, they actually do their own operations independent of one another. So they have been targeting very heavily the bases, specifically in Bahrain. The Sheikh Isa Air Base has been struck very harshly. And in Jordan as well, they've been really going after a lot of targets in Jordan. So this has been command and control centers. This has been warehouses. This has been centers for example, the servicing and maintenance of helicopters. They've, of course, taken out a lot of air defense systems, and there's some evidence that we have of the air defense systems being taken out by Iranian missile strikes. But these are all of the locations. Now, of course, the United States won't admit its casualties, but the question is here, and I just pose this question to everyone, that if the United States had pre-warning of the strikes coming to hit Ain al-Assad base in Iraq in 2020, proper pre-warning, and Iran launched, I believe it was a few dozen ballistic missiles specifically at that base, and the U.S. forces had time to take shelter, what do you think has happened this time? At Ain al-Assad, it was over 100 U.S. service members who were injured. So the idea here that all of these sites, pull it up again for everyone to see here, all of these bases, all of these positions, and I don't believe this actually includes the sites that have been struck in Iraq this time since the escalation over the past days, that there's just no casualties, that the United States is not suffering even injuries, even traumatic brain injuries, as they claim. It's not viable. It's not believable. And I believe that them saying nothing and not admitting a single casualty tells a different story. Really, that's an admission of guilt, that they have suffered significant casualties. Now, I cannot say honestly that I have any idea how many casualties they have suffered. I can't put a number on that. That's not my expertise. But the idea that they've suffered no casualties is a bit of a stretch, to say the least. Iran also has released footage of it firing up some of its drones. So we'll take a look at that as well. These are some of the drones that they fired towards targets, because the majority of the damage, and we'll look at some more of it, that has been done, has been carried out using ballistic missiles. And in the last show, we talked about the more modern, newer generations of ballistic missiles were being used heavily by Iran. It does look like they're also using those older ballistic missiles as well. So it perhaps indicates that their stockpiles are larger than we previously thought. And the other impressive thing is they have been able to fire off from single locations, with the U.S. knowing that they're going to retaliate, dozens of missiles in single batches. And they look like they've been extremely successful. Now, we have, of course, limited access because a lot of these satellite imagery, the satellite imagery that we get, of course, comes from American companies, right? So we don't have a full picture of exactly everything that was hit, but we do have enough information to indicate that serious damage has been done to a number of sites. But here is the drone footage that Iran published. And of course, as well, keep in mind that the majority of the damage has been committed using missiles. So just some footage there that was released by Iran of it firing off drones at U.S. targets. And it's interesting because we actually have quite a bit of evidence coming out. As you see here from the 5th Fleet Base. This is the satellite imagery. And of course, it's blurred. If you see that they actually blur this. But the satellite imagery that has been released clearly shows that the 5th Fleet Base, and there is also photographic evidence from a distance of this site burning, but it appears that a warehouse on the 5th Fleet Base has been struck. Now, the 5th Fleet headquarters, the port at which the 5th Fleet Base is situated, has been so badly damaged in the past by Iranian ballistic missile attacks, so heavily targeted, that the concrete itself has cracked. So the port is just a write-off at this point. And it seems like they're simply picking off and just finishing off these bases. And I think they've admitted as such as well in the United States that that the 5th Fleet Base is a write-off at this point. But they want to make sure that they clear them out of these bases. And now they're focusing in Bahrain very heavily on the Sheikh Isa base, where there is more targets for Iran to hit. And they're just blowing them to pieces. For instance, here again, this is all the way in Jordan, so longer range missiles. And we have their direct hits. We see those two black scorch marks there, which indicate direct hits on targets inside of U.S. military base in Jordan. Playing that there. So this footage, it not only indicates that Iran is still capable of delivering massive blows, but it is doing it with great precision. And this is something that simply cannot be ignored by the United States. I mean, they can come out with these sort of cope narratives about what is happening, but the reality is they don't really have any options in front of them. And again, and we go through this quite frequently, but it is important to pull up when the United States, because recently Trump said that they want to take Kharg Island. This over here is the Strait of Hormuz, and Kharg Island is here. So it's all the way up towards the north of the Persian Gulf. The reason why I'm pointing that out, and the reason why I frequently point this out, is because it has no bearing on whether the Strait of Hormuz can be opened or closed and who has control over it. The whole purpose of that, taking Kharg Island, would be to inflict an economic blow on Iran. And again, it's quite close to the Iranian mainland. If the United States chooses to try and seize it, it's going to suffer serious casualties. And, in, I suppose, the memory of the late Lindsey Graham, who advocated for this as one of the many favorite war crimes that Mr. Graham had in mind of committing. It's fine to lose soldiers in order to take an island like Kharg Island. But of course, it does nothing for securing and becoming the guardians, as Trump says, of the Strait of Hormuz. No bearing whatsoever. Again, to remind people, and we'll get into Yemen in a bit, but the idea here that Iran, which is much more powerful than Yemen, that somehow the United States can secure the Strait of Hormuz, that it can inflict a blow on Iran, whether by a land invasion. And I'll just tell you, okay, let's say worst case scenario. I'm going to throw this out here and make a claim here. Okay, the United States take Kharg Island. The United States take Qeshm. They take Abu Musa and the Greater and Lesser Tum. They take all of these islands. Let's say they even do invasions into mainland Iran. Let's go even further than that. Let's say that the United States, they actually seize areas throughout the Iranian mainland in the south. They take territory throughout the south. Iran will still be able to close the Strait of Hormuz. Because it's very simple to close the Strait of Hormuz. And this is, Iran shares the largest span of land of any country in the Strait of Hormuz. So you cannot simply stop them by invading territory or bombing them. And we've seen this again, and the reason why I'm so confident in stating this is because Yemen, which is militarily nowhere near as powerful as Iran, managed to lock down the Red Sea. For years, they locked down the Red Sea. And not only did they lock it down, they managed to endure 2 different military operations led by the U.S. Biden administration and a very intense air campaign that was carried out using those B-1 and B-2 bombers that Trump loves to brag so much about. They endured a month and a half, which cost the U.S. taxpayer billions, where the United States used its best, most advanced bombers to bombard Yemen and took out civilian targets, everything, you name it. And still, Ansarullah in Yemen managed to close off Bab el-Mandeb, impose and expand its blockade during these attacks. When the US and its EU allies would get more aggressive with Yemen, they would respond by closing it down to more and more countries. And so if the US Trump administration failed in a month and a half of its intense bombing campaign against Yemen to open up the Red Sea, to end the blockade which was imposed on the Zionists as they were committing genocide in Gaza, because the government in Yemen decided to stand with Gaza. If they couldn't stop and end the blockade of Bab el-Mandeb and the Red Sea back then, what makes you think that they can do it when it comes to Iran? It makes no sense. It makes no sense. And quite frankly, only people who know absolutely nothing about West Asia, about the region of the world, this region of the world, will tell you that this is going to be successful. Which brings me to the overarching point here that has to again be made. This is a war for Israel. Israel is calling the shots. These shots are called in Tel Aviv, not Washington. And we know this not because there isn't power in Washington, not because Israel is somehow, as the smaller country, it could destroy the United States. No, because the lobby has just simply captured the Trump administration. They have no ability to push back in any way. And as I have been saying in stream after stream here, The memorandum of understanding was dead the second the United States refused to force the Israelis to withdraw from southern Lebanon. When they went ahead and doubled down on allowing the Israelis to maintain an illegal occupation of South Lebanon, that was it. They got that puppet regime in Beirut, the U.S. proxy regime, the bunch of they're not democratically elected. They're not representatives of the Lebanese people. They're representatives of the United States. And it got that regime that it implanted there, that it owns, to sign another memorandum of understanding after their own memorandum of understanding with Iran, where they pledged to end the war on all fronts, where they got this proxy regime in Beirut to put on paper that they would allow the Israelis to occupy South Lebanon. And they would allow for neighboring countries to come in and help them with the job of fighting their own people and pushing their country towards a state of civil war. And now we also know that the U.S. military itself is going to deploy its own task force, its advisory team, troops, boots on the ground into Beirut under the guise of training and advising the Lebanese army to take the weapons of Hezbollah. Now, they are already trained frequently by the U.S. military. They already get this training. They already get this backing. Why are you sending extra troops there? Because the Financial Times revealed that they are sending through this advisory team, this military advisory team to Beirut. We talked about this on the last show, that there have been speculation that thousands of U.S. troops were going to be sent to Beirut. Now we have confirmation that there will be some troops at the very least sent. Now, people will say, well, that's not confirmation of ground forces. There's speculation about the ground forces. But what we have to keep in mind here is that if they start introducing these forces, that means they really truly do want to get the ball moving with creating a civil war inside of Lebanon. And if the United States had just done one thing, it had gone to the Israelis and said, withdraw from South Lebanon. You're not winning. Hezbollah is actually kicking your ass. You don't have a strategy. You've been dragged deep into South Lebanon. You have no options. But they didn't do that. What the United States did instead is they got their proxies to sign an agreement recognizing Israel, allowing for the Israelis to stay inside of the country, setting up a reality where the Lebanese government forfeited its right to even appeal through international legal bodies about Israeli war crimes. And then what has Israel done since? Of course, since this agreement has been signed, Hezbollah, which has been repositioning, it's been, of course, preparing for the next round, and has threatened as well that it's soon the front there in Lebanon is going to escalate. But when Hezbollah stopped retaliating, then the Israelis have continued to retaliate, to continue to burn civilian homes. Exactly what we see in Gaza, precisely the same situation. And the United States is now working on a conspiracy where openly President Trump is talking about, in front of him, in fact, using Ahmed al-Shara or Abu Muhammad al-Julani of Syria to launch an invasion, a cross-border invasion into the Bekaa to attack Hezbollah, and using Lebanese forces domestically to attack Hezbollah and cause a civil war to work on behalf of Israel. When all of this started happening, and we've gone through it in previous streams, when that started happening, it was done, it was over. And then it's the cherry on top, the fact that the United States decided, well, yeah, we're going to get a whole bunch of vessels to transit the Strait of Hormuz, clearly in violation of the MOU or the understandings as they had been implemented up until that point between the Iranians and the US. And we're going to try and coordinate for a bunch of those ships to go through. Iran said no. Iran struck those ships because it's not going to allow any traffic through the Strait of Hormuz without its supervision. It was not even charging a fee, which of course it's saying that it wanted to do, that was its interpretation, that it had a right to a fee. But it started striking those ships. And of course, straight away, they're attacking southern Iran. They're bombing southern Iran. And this came after countless provocations, countless threats, all sorts of nonsense that happened before this and violations of the MOU. And Now we're back to full-scale war because the Trump administration couldn't do one thing. It couldn't tell the Israelis no. So what does that tell you? The Israelis run this. There is, again, the reason why I pulled this up and I made the active claim that even if U.S. forces, and they probably had to sacrifice God knows how many thousands of men in order to try and do this. Let's say they took on all those islands belonging to Iran in the Persian Gulf, and they did ground incursions into different parts of southern Iran, and they succeeded, and they took all those islands. Iran could still close the Strait of Hormuz. That will not open the Strait of Hormuz. It's a stupid strategy. Now, the only strategy, the only way that this makes sense, that this war is taking place, that it happened in the first place, that it continues to rage on and inflict such damage, economic damage, is that this is Israel, not the United States. The U.S. does not gain anything from this. Nothing at all. There is nothing. In fact, what it did is it struck very close to a nuclear power facility the other day. And if these nuclear power facilities, by the way, these nuclear power plants and facilities are struck, you could have intrusion into the seawater in the Persian Gulf. And of course, the south of Iran might become uninhabitable, but the majority of the lion's share of the country will still be inhabitable. What's going to happen if he strikes those nuclear energy facilities, Trump, and he takes them out? What's going to happen? All of these Persian Gulf countries will become uninhabitable. Uninhabitable. If there's nuclear waste that gets into material that gets into the Persian Gulf, floods into the Persian Gulf's waters, there's a spillage, then all of these countries, and as you may know, obviously the UAE has normalized ties with the Israelis and started integrating its air defense systems and military, but all of these countries here are US allies. The United States is depending upon these Gulf regimes for trillions in investment that Donald Trump openly brags about. Trump himself has investments in the Gulf, personal investments. Why would you want to kill the Gulf? Already it's suffering economically. It is already suffering economically. The Gulf has taken such an enormous hit, and the Strait of Hormuz has never fully opened in this entire time since February 28, or just after that when Iran officially imposed the blockade. All of those Persian Gulf countries, you imagine that they become uninhabitable, or even if the United States takes this all the way and starts going after Iranian civilian infrastructure, like Trump is threatening to do. If Trump actually goes after Iran's civilian infrastructure and takes out all of the bridges and the power plants and desalination, Iran is going to do that back to those Persian Gulf. So Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the UAE, Qatar, all of them. And in fact, what we saw is because U.S. forces are actually basing themselves in Oman, for the first time, the port of Duqm, which is based in Oman, was struck in a surprise attack that the Iranians launched against it. So even Oman, right, this port here, where the U.S. military was operating, Iran decided to hit it. Okay? If the United States goes all the way here, what we're going to see is that all of those Persian Gulf countries, or the lion's share of them, will take enormous hits. And if the desalination, if the energy infrastructure is taken out by Iran, forget Kuwait, forget Qatar, forget Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, they're gone. Is that good for the United States? You're going to get that investment still. Is that good for the global economy? Is that going to help Trump, even personally, the Republican Party? Is that going to help them? Losing thousands of U.S. soldiers on meaningless, pointless invasions of Iranian territory for no reason whatsoever. Is that going to help anyone? Even if you're a U.S. imperialist, this is not what you want to do. This makes no sense for U.S. hegemony in the region. It makes no sense for U.S. power projection around the world. Nothing whatsoever. You're taking a beating. You're getting battered by Iran. which has comparatively, in terms of its military budget, it's nothing. It's peanuts compared to what the US spends. You're supposed to be the military superpower. This does the opposite. So again, we go back. The Israelis, obviously, and the Israel lobby obviously run the show. And so what we can draw from that is, we can't conclusively prove this, but what do they have on Trump? That really is the big question here. What do they have on Trump? Because some people will be like, yeah, well, like the Biden administration and the rest, they were also subservient to the Israelis. And that is true to an extent. They did not allow a war with Iran to escalate. Every single time they de-escalated it. And the reason why is because they knew that this would happen. Because anyone rational who's sitting in the room would tell the US president and would advise the US government not to allow this to happen. But Trump is willing to go against the Senate, go against the Congress, launch his war, all for Israel. That's the whole point of this. And it's Israel that yet hasn't got enough out of this war. And Israel's goal in all of this is very, very clear. Israel wants to weaken Iran. It knows that regime change is not going to happen. This was never, like, they would have loved to get regime change out of the initial decapitation strikes that occurred. They would have loved to have got that, of course. But that wasn't realistic. And we know that that wasn't going to happen because Israel did a decapitation strike during the at the start of the 12-day war in June of 2025, and it didn't work. So why would killing Khamenei change that picture? Of course it wouldn't. And the idea, oh, Trump, I don't buy this either. Trump was duped. There's nobody around him, no one at all around him to say, hey, that's a bad idea. There's a reason why every other administration before you for 30 damn years has said no to this. I don't buy that personally. I don't buy that. I think this administration is captured. Now, there might be people internally that are pushing back and that reach the MOU because they realize we have to do something about this situation. But it's evident that that battle is being lost. That the reality is the Trump administration cannot say no to Israel. Because the US gains nothing. If this goes all the way, then Israel wants to gain one thing, weakening Iran. So that's why Trump is threatening to strike all their infrastructure. Because how does that do anything to Iran? If you want to take out the regime and topple the Iranian government, taking out this civilian infrastructure, how does that make, you're going to bomb all the bridges, bomb the power plants. You want to destroy the country. That's what you're talking. You're talking about the death of a nation that you want to inflict, which won't be possible, by the way. There's hundreds and hundreds of power plants throughout Iran. It's not as simple as hitting a few power plants and it's done. Now, I'm not saying people won't suffer. They will definitely suffer. But it's not as easy as people think, taking out and killing a country, especially like Iran. And the Israelis now are talking again about using, the Israeli media, or at least Haaretz came out with an article today talking about, we're going to use the Kurds to go in and take Iranian territory. That's not going to work. The whole purpose of this war is to weaken Iran. That's it. And the only way they have, because they can't do it militarily, they've learned that they can't take out Iran's military, right? Trump keeps saying that Iran has no military and air defenses, and he is a joke, right? COPCOM's a joke, all of it. But the whole point of this is they couldn't take out Iran militarily. They couldn't take out its leadership. The government didn't collapse. And anyone with any brain that knew anything about this situation knew that the government in Iran was not going to collapse by killing Khamenei. There's a reason why Ayatollah Khamenei was in his home. Why act with such confidence and be in such a public place, knowing a war is going to happen, knowing that they've launched a decapitation strike before, that they've done this in the past, right? And they're threatening to do it again, and knowing that you're going to be a target if you think that the entire government, the whole Islamic Republic, is going to collapse. No one with a brain. And the Israelis know that too. But the whole point here, again, is to batter Iran. They want Iran to suffer. They want average Iranians to suffer. They want Iranians to die. They want Iranians to fight each other. They want Iran divided, destroyed. And that is a process but the process is started by crippling the civilian infrastructure in Iran, and that is what the Israelis want the United States to do for them, and pay all the prices for them as well, because this war is Israel's war. Now, in the past, people have made arguments about other wars that are fought for Israeli interests. There is no dispute about this one. I don't know how you can possibly dispute this, because it makes no sense. It makes no sense. Now, if the Trump administration was powerful enough in its own right to fight back against the Israel lobby, then why are they back at war? Okay, Trump was tricked. Let's say Trump was tricked. He was too stupid. Okay, we know he's not really a smart guy, right? You know, it wasn't too far before he assassinated the IRGC general Qasem Soleimani that he didn't know what the Quds force was of the IRGC, right? He's like, I love the Kurds are wonderful people, right? That's what he was saying when he was asked about the IRGC's Quds force. So he doesn't know anything. Sure, okay, I'll accept that argument. Now he's seen what happens when you go to war with Iran. Now he's seen that the Strait of Hormuz is closed. Now he's taken out the leadership. Why has he gone back to war? Why didn't he tell Israel to withdraw from southern Lebanon? He's seen it demonstrated before his very eyes that the government doesn't collapse. And I'll go a step further. He's seen tens of millions of Iranians, and he's acknowledged this, tens of millions of Iranians in the streets of Tehran and Qom and Mashhad come out grieving the leader that he killed. So the idea that he isn't getting any of it, I mean, maybe he has dementia, right? I don't know. But him and all the people in his administration don't get it. They're all just tricked by Netanyahu. Netanyahu just came over and he tricked them. Okay, I don't buy that. I don't buy that. And then, again, if it's his own interests in doing this war, you have to demonstrate what those interests actually are. And you can't find any, because even his own personal business interests are being sacrificed here. So then that leads you to the question, what do they have on him personally? How much power does the Israel lobby have over this administration? Because it's more than previous administrations. It goes further, it goes deeper than that, evidently, with this administration. And we can see that just by the funding of his campaign, who put all the money into his campaign. But these are big questions here. And people want to avoid them. But this is just the reality. How else can you make sense of this? You can't. Because ignorance is, I don't believe ignorance is even an excuse anymore. Now, talking about ignorance, Trump, of course, has been crashing out and lying. And here's some of his rhetoric, just to reintroduce his rhetoric to everybody.
Iran has declared the Strait of Hormuz closed. Is that true, Mr. President?
It's open as far as we're concerned. Don't talk about it. Talk about the reason that you asked me to speak.
Okay. We appreciate your time, sir.
Don't talk about it. It's open as far as we're concerned. That's his narrative. And I guess don't talk about anything in the entire region, right? Strait of Hormuz is closed. It's going to, and it's impacting the markets. But in reality, the Strait of Hormuz has never fully opened during this entire period of the MOU. And of course, now the U.S. has reimposed its sanctions after approving a waiver. And the Treasury, the Secretary of the Treasury, has issued more sanctions against Iran. So the situation is even more severe. And then when it comes to southern Lebanon, so they're actually handing out evacuation notices to villagers in southern Lebanon, dropping these flyers and getting them to evacuate and continuing to bomb. And hey, it gets even more insane than that, because there's been another escalation which has occurred. And that escalation really needs to be paid attention to. That is in Yemen, which is the next element of the war, which opening this front is perhaps one of the most important. Now, I want everyone to take note here because this is another important thing to note when it comes to covering the topic of Yemen. Al Jazeera and the Jerusalem Post both have the same claims in their headlines here, right? And that is tensions rising as Yemen government attacks Sana'a airport. Okay, this is just the most stupid propaganda nonsense. The same in both of them, right? Right? Houthi controlled Sana'a airport, right? Yemeni forces strike, okay? Saudi Arabia bombed Sana'a International Airport, right? Sana'a is the capital of Yemen, and it is where Ansarullah, or the Houthis, which is not their name, operate a government. It is a proper government. There are different parties present, right? Now, of course, Ansarullah rules over this territory. No one's disputing that. I'm not pretending like there's some Western-style democracy in Sana'a. But for all intents and purposes, Ansarullah leads the government in Yemen. There is no Yemeni official internationally recognized government. There is none. There is none. There is a bunch of amus, like old guys, right, who are on the Saudi payroll, who got brought into the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Riyadh and were a hotel government, right? They're not a real government. Okay, they're the opposition because the capital was seized in 2015, and then a foreign power came to plant back in power a puppet. That was what happened in Yemen. But none of the world, because no countries other than Iran really, has any interest in backing Yemen in any way, shape, or form, right? They'd rather have better relations with Saudi Arabia and all the Gulf countries, the GCC states, because they're oil rich and they're powerful. So what has happened is the international community, right? That international community has permitted a blockade on Yemen, which has been imposed by Saudi Arabia and its allies, which has starved to death hundreds of thousands of people in Yemen. And the Ansarullah government, the government of Yemen, has about 2/3, when it took over, 2/3 of the Yemeni armed forces sided with it. So the majority of the army sided with it. They have the capital city. They have the majority of the country's population under their control. And on the opposition side, you have a non-government. It's not a real government. It's a coalition of people who were formed as a government in exile by Saudi Arabia. And then in Aden, which is the other major city, right, which used to be the capital of the southern Yemen, historically, South Yemen, this port city, this key port city, there was a governing body that was set up in Aden, but it was formerly controlled by UAE-backed puppets, the Southern Transitional Council, and the Saudi-backed puppets. And as soon as the Emirati-backed puppets were pushed and made that push because the UAE wanted them to take over the whole country, the south of the country and the east, when they did that, the Saudis got angry and the Saudis put pressure on the UAE and the STC collapsed. And see, both of these sides, you can just pay them off. It's not a government, right? But look, this is the propaganda that is pushed. Yemen government attacks Sana'a airport. The Yemen government, Saudi Arabia launched airstrikes on Sana'a International Airport. Okay? And here in Jerusalem Post, they actually admit that, right? They actually admit that if we go down into the article earlier, anti-Houthi, right? So Yemeni government, Saudi-backed outlets, right, they indicated that Saudi Arabia's Air Force was responsible for the strikes. Well, it's not only the Saudi-backed Yemeni media that said that Saudi Arabia was responsible for the airstrikes on Sana'a International Airport. I mean, how else were they carried out? Who else would have carried them out? The Saudi-backed Yemeni forces don't have their own air force that they can go and carry out that those strikes at will with. They don't have modern fighter jets in the way. They don't have autonomy. But it's framed both by, again, this is the thing, throughout the corporate media, Israeli media, Gulf-owned media, all of it, all of them do the same thing. The Yemeni government said that their airspace was violated. What do you mean? What do you mean? Half the country is occupied. You have all these foreign militia forces. They bring in people from the RSF, the Sudanese genocide forces of the RSF. They brought them in to fight in Yemen before. The Israelis were in the United Arab Emirates and training up militants to go and fight for the STC, the Sovereign Transitional Council, which was so independent and represented the will of the people. So the STC is legitimate to include in the internationally recognized government and collapses after 5 seconds when Saudi Arabia says no. The STC, but not Ansar Allah. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. But they all promote this nonsense about Yemen. And unfortunately, nobody has an interest in standing up to this and stating the facts. And the media just doesn't cover Yemen. So if you know the facts about Yemen, then you can hate Ansar Allah all you want. But the fact that Houthi rebels and the Yemen government declares that its airspace cannot be violated. And guess who the Yemeni government, the internationally recognized government, is claiming is violating their airspace? Iran, by sending a civilian airliner in. Because the bombing of Sana'a International Airport was carried out by Saudi Arabia. And we have, tracking websites, and we have reports of fighter jets even taking off. It's all there. It's all on the record, right? But they said that, their airspace was violated because Iran came to break the blockade on Yemen by landing in Sana'a International Airport. And so after these flights, and there's been a number of flights that Iran has done, after one of these civilian airliners made it into Yemeni airspace, Saudi Arabia, which was threatening it was going to do something about it, intervened with its air force. And because of the strikes, an Iranian civilian airliner landed in Hodeidah, right? Instead of Sana'a, the capital. And so that was the whole point, break the blockade, which has been imposed. And the blockade is chiefly responsible for the deaths of over 400,000 people in Yemen. And the suffering of the people in Yemen. The internationally recognized government. You know who's violating the airspace of Yemen? Everyone else. No statements about the violation of the airspace by the United States, by the Israelis, by the Saudis, by the Emiratis, by everyone. But by this, and again, it's just a puppet regime. But if you read this media, this biased media, from everywhere, because again, no one has an interest in telling the truth. Because who wants to stand up for little Yemen? And again, it's not about backing them and caring about what their ideology is, but it's just stating the facts on the ground. They are the real Yemeni military. They have the majority of the Yemeni armed forces on their side. The majority of Yemen's population lives within the territory controlled by Ansar Allah. But they refuse to call them Ansar Allah, which is their actual party name. They call them the Houthis instead. And look, they're proxies for Iran, which again, it demonstrates that it's just propaganda. And those who say this with seriousness don't know anything about what they're talking about. They don't know the history of this movement, right? They don't have any understanding whatsoever. They don't have genuine critiques. It's nothing to do with that. But no one has any interest because they'd rather please the GCC states. And they don't recognize the Yemeni government. And again, why do you think they don't recognize the Yemeni government? Why do you think that they want to get rid of Hezbollah? Why do you think they want to get rid of the Iraqi militias? Do you think it's anything to do, if they were pro-Israel, do you think that there would be any problem with them? No. Ansar Allah would be called Ansar Allah today. It would be able to run Yemen. It would do a deal. Saudi Arabia would be there to do a deal. There wouldn't be any problem. But again, the issue is these are organic movements within these countries which do have popular bases of support. They want sovereignty, right? And they have their own ideologies and their ways that they want to. Iraq is a different question, of course. The Iraqi militias are a different question here. But they want sovereignty. They want to clear foreigners off of their land to stop exploiting them, particularly the West, right? And number one, they oppose Israel. That's why. So a genocide had to be committed in Yemen, and we had to deny reality across the media spectrum because Yemen had a movement, love them or hate them, that decided to stand up against foreign domination of their country and their national resources and to fight for Palestine. And no one can dispute it. The one government on the planet that actually fired on the Israelis in retaliation for the Gaza genocide was Yemen, was the Ansarullah government of Yemen. That's just the truth. But no, they have to be treated as a gang, as a terrorist organization in a bunch of different Western countries, because that's how they're going to be labeled. They cannot be legitimized. And the reason, again, they can't be legitimized is not to do with how they actually function. Because the Western nations, the Israelis, don't care about dictatorships and repressive regimes. Anyone can be in control of any country. I mean, right now, and this shouldn't have to be laid out to everyone, but right now, Donald Trump brags openly about putting Al-Qaeda's leader in Syria, a guy that used to be a commander in Daesh, in ISIS, in control of Syria. He brags about it. They don't care. As long as you're a puppet and you do their bidding. They don't care about what your policy is. They don't care about human rights violations. Human rights is simply, it's not something that is implemented actually to protect human rights. It's just an idea that is used basically in order to go after people they don't like. Look how morally superior we are in the West, our liberal Western democracy. That's all it is. It's another excuse. It's not actually real. These concepts were nice when they were created, but it's just weaponized against the enemies of the United States and the Israelis and the collective West. And that's the reality. That's where we're at. And it's unfortunate, but that is just true. So in retaliation anyway for the attacks on their airport, Yemen's Ansarullah launched a number of different missile strikes. Here's footage that appeared that came out from Abha International Airport in Saudi Arabia. And these are just brief clips that are being posted, allegedly from Saudi Arabia. I don't know why that's so slow, that clip. But there's a number of different videos that emerged that showed ambulances rushing to the scenes. Initially, there was denial that anything hit, and then there was reports coming out and locals talking about the strikes that occurred and hits on the international airport, and then a military base as well in Saudi Arabia. And here's some footage, by the way, from the Saudi attack on Sana'a International Airport. So they're hitting the runway. And again, like we're talking about international law and we need to recognize the internationally recognized government of Yemen. And look, Saudi Arabia just strikes an international airport. There you go. Just striking international airports to impose a blockade that has killed over 400,000 people, starving the country to death. And they just get away with it. Do you think the United States or any Western power is going to stand up and condemn that this happened? No, they'll turn around and they'll condemn the Houthi rebels. They're the ones at fault here. The Houthi rebels are the ones at fault. And so Ansarullah are to blame, not Saudi Arabia. There's no accountability for them. And it's fine. You know, the United States, when it bombed the international airport, Nothing. They can kill foreign leaders. They can bomb embassies. They can do whatever they like, whenever they like. And again, Saudi Arabia, not exactly the best track record with human rights. But they just simply do not care. They don't care because they're their friends. They're their friends. And the fact that we even be talking about that as somehow that makes you a viable government, human rights, makes you a viable government in this day and age is just utterly ridiculous. At this point, people LARP on about, oh, the Houthis and even the Taliban. I mean, you're openly continuing to aid and supply Israel with bombs. You don't care. So why are you holding and get your back up? Oh, how dare the Taliban? Are you better than them? No. Absolutely not. So they don't have a point. They don't have a point. And there was a number of different images and that came out. Here's one. If you can see the plume of smoke coming out. This is the King Khalid Air Base. The Ansarullah targeted, I believe, with 3 different rounds of ballistic missiles and drones towards these targets. And let's pull this up on screen here. So this is the live map. This map website was really prominent during the Syrian civil war, but here are the locations struck by Yemen's Ansarullah, where the air defenses were triggered in Jeddah and Abha. And these are locations pretty close to Yemen, so they're easier to hit, evidently. Whereas if you see to strike, Tel Aviv is a lot further, a lot longer distance. And most of Ansarullah's munitions are designed to hit Saudi Arabia. They haven't yet decided to hit Riyadh and other areas, which they may well decide to do soon. So, and then we have as well the denials and Saudi Arabia intercepts Houthi missile attack launched in retaliation for earlier strikes on Sana'a, right? But, even the Jerusalem Post has a better coverage than some of the Gulf media sites because they at least acknowledge that it started with an attack on Sana'a. And it's a retaliation, right? Even when there's one missile and it was shot down, right? Nothing happened, nothing to see here in Saudi Arabia at all. All those reports, ignore them. Trust me, bro. But it's still better than, Yemen's government said that its airspace was violated by a civilian airliner coming to land at its international airport after it's been under this medieval siege, this blockade that's been imposed, which has in turn helped commit a genocide. Well, it was being called, if we go a few years back, this is being referred to publicly as a genocide. It was 400,000 people, hundreds of thousands starved to death. And Yemen's government, like a bunch of puppets, just ridiculous. And they were defending their airspace. Saudi Arabia attacked Sana'a International Airport. That's what happened. But unfortunately, we have to navigate our way through the utter nonsense and fairy tales of the corporate media of all different countries, by the way. Because again, it's whoever power, who's benefiting from this narrative. And when I'm laying this out, and I've said and I've informed people about what's going on in Yemen, and you can have all your disagreements with the Ansarullah authorities, but for all intents and purposes, they're the real government operating there. They're the only proper indigenous government. Let's just be honest. It's just ridiculous to pretend otherwise, but we got this fairy tale nonsense, the circus that we have to perform of pretending things in order to make everyone happy. And I'm not in the game of pretending. Personally, it just frustrates me. I don't like lies, personally. And so this stuff is one of the biggest cover-ups that you see is with the Yemen stuff, because they cannot admit the truth at all whatsoever. But with this escalating, the reason why it's really important to talk about Yemen, with this escalating, Saudi Arabia is going to be under fire. If Saudi doesn't agree to do some sort of deal, Yemen might do this push. It's been mobilizing its forces now and getting ready for a new round against Saudi's forces. And Saudi Arabia has two options. Either it could continue to fight, which it tried to do. It thought that it could win a victory against Ansar Allah in a few months back in 2015. And look where we are now. And then by early 2022, it decided to sign a UN brokered ceasefire. Now, the Biden administration came forth and said, we're going to broker the ceasefire, and later tried to even take credit for it. But of course, Biden was not responsible. The US was not responsible for negotiating that ceasefire. It was the United Nations. Right? It was done through the UN. And it was between Saudi Arabia and Ansar Allah. But of course, the blockade was never ended. And one of the conditions that Saudi Arabia refuses to abide by in actually achieving a real agreement, a breakthrough agreement with Ansar Allah, is doing one thing which they just cannot bring themselves to do, and that's apologize. That's it. That's one of the issues, the sticking points in the previous rounds of negotiations to reach an agreement between Ansar Allah and Saudi Arabia and its proxies. You know, the Saudi rebels, Saudi-backed rebels, and the Ritz-Carlton government or the hotel government. And it was just that they couldn't apologize. They couldn't bring themselves to apologize, to issue a formal apology. That's one of the points that Saudi Arabia refused to do is, one, apologize. One, admit that they're at fault and they made a mistake. And that's what Ansar Allah wanted. They wanted an apology. Which, fair enough, after that amount of killing and death, to get an apology, you know, that is something reasonable to ask for. But if Saudi Arabia decides to, you know, go the route of fighting against Yemen and putting its, doubling down on its position, then the Red Sea will be closed. And I'm sure they'll choke off Bab el-Mandeb. And what will be of the global economy if that happens? That's going to be catastrophic. And Saudi Arabia is not going to be able to get away with piping its natural resources out through the Red Sea anymore. So that option is dead for it. So it really has to think, what do we do here? Perhaps we sign an agreement to allow the Yemen to become united. And if they do it, Saudi Arabia has it. And that's how you know that this internationally recognized government of Yemen is nonsense, is because Saudi Arabia has been there negotiating with Ansar Allah. And if Saudi came to an agreement with them, there would be suddenly unity and the conflict would be over. Because they're at war with Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia has proxies. If you go through the record of what's happened in this conflict, there's no argument you can make. It's just sort of stupid to argue the opposite at this point. At this point in the conflict, to argue the internationally recognized government. But yeah, I guess I'm going on about that quite a bit. But if the Yemeni situation explodes, this is a massive front that is opened, that is going to have an enormous economic impact. But it's also as well, like for the United States, they're going to take big hits because Ansar Allah no doubt will be hitting the UAE and others. They'll be hitting all sorts of military facilities in the Gulf around the clock. Hezbollah has also threatened that they will retaliate against the Israelis for their escalation in South Lebanon. I'm sure the Iraqi militias will be more than happy to do their part, as well as we've seen in the past. They're all charged up after the funeral of Ayatollah Khamenei. And so the region is looking like it's going to explode. And again, another thing that I want to note, because Israel insists on violating the Gaza ceasefire and slaughtering civilians in Gaza and blocking aid from coming in, if this all goes into a big regional war again, which could get actually expand and be bigger than the one we saw earlier this year, the 40-day war period, what Iran calls the Ramadan war. If it goes in that direction, I believe that the Gaza front may be triggered also if it really explodes and goes all out. So, I mean, and the problem here is, as soon as we get into the territory of all-out regional war, all the actors are fighting, Tehran is being bombed, Tel Aviv is getting hit all the time. When we get back to that, where are the off-ramps? Because, and this is where I'm going to focus a little bit on Iran itself. Iran has a reformist government. And that reformist government, the reformist camp in Iran, just simplifying it here, this reformist camp has historically wanted to normalize ties with the West, right? That they have that orientation of wanting to seek out the West for agreements, economic ties. They're the ones that are responsible for negotiating with the Obama administration, the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the nuclear deal of 2015. And before, they were headed by Hassan Rouhani, and they had Zarif as their foreign minister and all of these. But now, obviously, it's Abbas Araghchi and Pezeshkian, the president. But they have aggravated a lot of people who do form the support base for the Islamic Republic of Iran. And as we've seen, that is a large support base that exists, very much so. They have frustrated that portion of the public, and much of the public, in fact, even those who sort of took a middle line position, but became a lot more nationalistic when their country was attacked. Very reasonable position to assume, even if you don't like your government. But those people have been angry because they saw the MOU as making unnecessary concessions, especially the hardline supporters of the Islamic Republic who are driven by their religious ideology. They saw it as a betrayal of their martyred leader. That's the way that they interpreted this. But the reformists pushed for this agreement. They stuck to it despite these violations and these threats and everything else, and they tried to implement it. And I personally believe, Qaribaf and Pezeshkian and Araghchi and these, I believe they're genuine in that they wanted absolutely to implement this. I believe it. Just understanding the political situation. In fact, what it's done is it's discredited them in front of the public because they stuck their necks out. They put their backs on the line for a deal, having negotiated once before the 2025 12-day war where Israel attacked, when they were going and trying to sign a deal with the United States. The U.S. Trump administration simply coordinated with their Israeli allies. And at that time, by the way, there were all these stories coming out in the Israeli media and the U.S. media about Donald Trump and Netanyahu and how they're fighting and how Netanyahu is being constrained by Trump and Trump is bossing him around and there's a feud and Trump's going to recognize Palestine even, right? We heard all of that. We've gone through this before on the show. Before 2025, the war. And what happened is these reformists were negotiating. They were trying to get a deal. It seemed like it was progressing. And the United States coordinated with the Israelis to attack. The same thing happened before the 28th of February this year. The Iranians offered historic concessions to the United States. But the United States and the Israelis, again, we heard the fights between Israel and the U.S. Trump and Netanyahu are at each other's throats, we heard. Netanyahu is worried. Israel is worried. The Israeli media is coming out and talking about how terrible it's going to be because we're so close to a nuclear deal. And it might be even worse than Obama's. And Trump has abandoned Israel. We heard this. And the reformists were there negotiating, offering historic concessions, and the United States and Israel together bomb and attack the country and assassinate their leader. And of course, commit their horrible massacre in Minab against all those schoolgirls. And now again, again, this reformist government has gone to the United States and has argued its case to the rest of the Iranian government and the system behind it, and its supreme leader has argued its case, despite the fact that Mujtaba Khamenei, the new supreme leader of Iran, issued a statement in which he said he had reservations, which means he didn't fully endorse it, but he let them go ahead because they're an elected government in Iran. And I believe that as much as we hear this talk about Iran is, a military dictatorship and all of the rest of this, I mean, they do allow their elected politicians in the republic to go pretty far, even against the will of their own base, public support, everything. If they're elected, and they let them do things that clearly they don't actually always 100% agree with. So I don't know if that description of Iran as a military dictatorship actually works. If anything, and this goes back to other times, and perhaps we'll talk about this a bit, but in Iran, the reformist camp, and you had like the Green Movement, right, which was a long time ago. There was these demonstrations in Iran. This reformist movement got more power because of that, in essence. And, it does have, obviously, its support base. It does have a backbone in terms of financial elites and all these people who are inside of Iran. Now, they want the success of the Iranian government. They're not people that are going to turn, because I've heard that people say, oh, they're going to turn and do a coup against the Iranian government. That stuff is, just sort of divisive rhetoric and propaganda, in my opinion. But these people do have pull. They do have sway, and they do have disagreements. And they were given a lot of sort of power and leeway to do what they wanted to do. And inside of Iran, people, when they come to the streets and demonstrate, historically, what we've seen is they've actually been able to push for reform. But that has actually happened. And if it was this hardcore, uncompromising military dictatorship, total dictatorship, I don't think that would have been possible. I don't think that, because you have the woman life freedom movement, right, which a lot of foreign influence in it, don't get me wrong, over the death of Mahsa Amini in, 2022. But what happened in that, we know that there are international influences on all of these events. Anything that happens in Iran, the Israelis, the Americans, at the time, the Saudis, right, will all get involved to try and stir up chaos inside of the country. They have terrorist organizations, Takfiris, the MEK, they might get some of these Shah people to do things. There's different Kurdish opposition groups. It's all sorts inside of Iran that it can weaponize against the Iranian government. But that being said, there was a recognition from the authorities in Iran back then, when those women life freedom protests were happening, that enough people were on the street, enough people were angry about specifically having these morality police inside of Tehran. They abolished the morality police afterwards. And there's a number of different things. And even this last wave in January of protests, which of course the propaganda is nonsense. And after, when the riots started, that was all foreign interference. There was nothing organic about that. But there were protests before that. There were genuine protests. And what happened is, partly the U.S. is responsible, but also mismanagement, which the government admitted to in Iran as well. But the U.S. basically had helped to manipulate the currency and the exchange rate in Iran, which led to protests, right? And big unions inside of Iran got behind it, and the public came to the streets. And what you saw as a reaction, if you actually paid attention to the Iranian media, is that you saw from Iranian politicians, and Masoud Pezeshkian, the president, came out and actually apologized for mismanagement, apologized for not doing well enough for the people. So right now, and why I'm saying all of this, it's important context to understand about what we're seeing right now. That reformist movement inside of Iran have time and time again tried to negotiate. And they're at this point just being embarrassed. and they copped a lot of criticism. And I think strategically speaking, these are intelligent people. People have made a point about pointing out the entire Iranian delegations that they've sent to like Pakistan and elsewhere. They're all PhDs, right? They're educated people. But I believe it was, sometimes you can say it's strategically not even smart to engage in these talks, because it's almost like a humiliation ritual, because there was never any promise that this war could end from the United States. You've negotiated with them before. They tear up their agreements every time, especially Trump. Obama reached the JCPOA, never fully implemented it. And then Trump comes in, he tears it apart, and it actually works to hurt Iran more than it helps Iran. And that's the experience with Trump. And then this war is being fought for Israeli interests, not American interests. Again, I will circle back to Donald Trump was asked about Iran's Quds forces. He was interviewed just before I think he was inaugurated, I'm pretty sure, if to memory, the first time. And he didn't know what the Quds forces are. This is not a guy who's educated in geopolitics. He doesn't understand the region. He probably doesn't understand anything about the ethnic makeup of Iran and its people. He doesn't understand anything. He probably thinks they speak Arabic, and like the majority of them, obviously. There's a small portion of the population who do speak Arabic, but they probably think the national language is Arabic, right, in Iran. Okay, he's pretty clueless. And a lot of people have argued against doing deals with the United States. And I personally think that this was never going to get anywhere, because, again, you have to defeat Israel. That's my reading of this, that this is an Israeli war, and therefore Israel is the one ultimately that has to be defeated. But I guess the reason why I'm going through all of this is because the Iranian politicians that stuck their neck out to try and make this agreement work have sacrificed a lot of political capital in order to make an agreement happen with the United States. You don't really hear this very much because, again, most people don't know it. And of course, there's little interest in anyone covering this. But that camp inside of Iran actually did sacrifice their political capital in order to try and make this happen. And look what happens every time. The US just spits in their face. And that's what we're seeing right now. And they're ready to go back to a war for Israel. And that appears to be what's happening. And otherwise, it's hard to make any sense of this situation other than that the Israelis have captured the Trump administration. And it is an administration that simply works for Israeli interests. And perhaps we'll go into that and U.S. military merger and all of the rest of this. There's a lot to go into on future streams here. I'm just going to remind everyone that we are looking for 300 new members to keep this show alive. If you do like this analysis, what we're covering here, all of the footage that we bring in, everything that we try to bring to you in terms of context here, then you can join us on Patreon. It's MintPress. And of course, YouTube. You can join our membership there. We do these shows every Monday and Thursday, 4 p.m. CST. Does look, by the way, like things are heating up. So I would expect that perhaps we might have some more footage soon coming in from Lebanon and also elsewhere as well, because tensions are incredibly high right now. But we are on the verge of something very big. And even the fact that Iran did go and take out those ATACMS tells you that it is prepared to go all the way now, that it is not joking. So with that said, there's a lot going on that we are going to continue to cover, and we will be back on Thursday to continue this coverage, to bring you all of the latest, to update you on everything. If you have liked this stream, please do hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, because we are being targeted for the algorithms. So please do put a comment in there and make sure you catch each stream that we're doing here. And we will see you again back in the same place, same time, 4 p.m. CST on Thursday, and follow our coverage as we cover the ongoing regional war in the region. Thank you to everyone for being on here today, and we will see you on